So we're finishing up today on worship, and again, we've tried as we might. We can't get our pastor to be suspended like that guy, and so, but you know, I've tried. But anyway, whoa, now that's not okay. Anyway, none of that, please. Here we go. We're finishing up. So we talked about. So our theme, of course, is real quickly. Here it is. Our theme is the Pentecostalization and Secularization of modern worship. By Pentecostalization, I'm talking about, for the most part, the song service has been Pentecostalized, and the whole service has been Pentecostalized to emphasize feelings and emotions over biblical truth, right? Emphasizing feelings and emotions over biblical truth, right? The Southern Baptists had their convention this last week, and a lot of people had to choose between feelings and what they think about stuff and biblical truth, what it says. And they voted, y'all probably heard this, they voted for an amendment to make it clear that a pastor is just to be a woman and not a female. Females cannot be pastors. And the vote carried by 74% to 26%. What that means is 26% of Southern Baptists think it's okay for a woman to be a pastor. So that only will increase over time, and it'll happen. All the major denominations have had the same thing happen, whether you're talking about the Episcopals, or you're talking about the Lutherans, or you're talking about the liberal part of the Presbyterians, and whether you're talking about some non-Southern Baptist churches that are just Baptist churches. And now the same things happen. They've ordained women, and then they've ordained homosexuals, and then they've ordained LGBTQ people, right? It's happened in every denomination. And it's split and divided the Episcopal denomination, it's split and divided the Methodist denomination, it'll split and divide the Southern Baptist too. Not this year, but in a few years down the road. Pentecostalization, how the Pentecostal and charismatic movement has infected modern worship and what we think of as worship, right? We think of the low lights and the waving your hands and the singing, praises and hallelujah and all that sort of stuff with the praise and worship band. People today think that's just normal. That's the way it should be done. They have no concept of anything different because they weren't raised now on anything different. So the Pentecostal and the secularization of modern evangelical worship. Now the secularization comes in what's the definition of a church? Why should we have church? And of course Rick Warren says, and of course there's this idea of pragmatism. The goal is to bring unbelievers into church. And to bring unbelievers into church, you do whatever pragmatism says, you do whatever works. If having a clown do clown acts on stage, if that works, and you do that. Whatever it takes to bring people in, right? So it's the purpose-driven church. Your church, and so we talked about all that, and I'll go back over all that stuff. So elements, I want to look at elements of a modern, So the elements, this is not it, brother. I uploaded a new one last night to Dropbox. I've got the on my I almost said chair, sorry, not yet. But anyway, the pew, on my pew, I have another one that has the up-to-date ones. But let's just go on. So I want to look at some elements. There's some specific, this is the one we did last week, that church emphasis on church growth. And in Spurgeon's day, what he said about that. Number 2, emphasis on numerical church growth, that it's numbers. It's numbers that mean something, and it's the numbers that we should be trying to attract. So the bigger and the better, and the more people you have, that's the way it's supposed to be. So we need to bust out of this building because this is too small. We need to move into a bigger auditorium and then you rent out the same place that I used to watch the Houston Rockets play basketball in, and you've got yourself a mega church, right? So it's all on church growth and it's all on numbers, right? That's what we're told today. That numbers are the most important thing. Not the spiritual life of your church, not the spiritual growth of Christians going to church. None of that. No, it's numerical. It's all about numbers and bringing as many people in as possible. And to bring as many people in as possible, that means you're going to have to bring a lot of unbelievers in. And so what does it take to bring unbelievers in? Well, it takes worldly amusements, worldly entertainments. It takes all that sort. So anyway, that's the idea and the new inventions. This is where I wanted to go to. Yeah, there you go, brother. I want to look at elements of worship today, right? And first, a couple different elements. Number 1, the pastor. Now, these are new elements that have been adopted and old ones that have been rejected by most evangelical churches today in how they do worship. The pastor in most modern worship churches is different in almost every way from the traditional pastor, right? This new phenomenon has been described as the pastor as rock star, all right? Now, some of their traits, Number one, obviously the most obvious one is dress. Most modern worship pastors try to dress and look young. Now you say, well, that's because they're young. I've seen 40, 50, 60-year-old dudes pastors try to dress as young and try to look young, right? I know my age. I'm not going to try to look 20 because it would be stupid if I tried. I'm just not going to anyway because I like what I like, and if it's old people stuff, I could care less. You want to laugh at these are good shoes actually. Brother Jonathan picked them out. But anyway, if you want to laugh at my Skechers, go ahead. But that's what old people like because we don't have to tie our laces. Old people don't want to tie their laces, do they? So I've even seen 40, 50, 60-year-old pastors dress up like young people. But that's it. You have to look stylish. And that usually means looking young. Used to be at a time when we used to think that old people looked hip and cool. Now it's just the young people, right? Even though some of them are too old to look young, hip, and cool, they try to do it anyway. So the dress is graphic T-shirts, ripped jeans, leather jackets, anything that'll let you. So the guy on the left, he's got the shirt untucked, he's got the jeans that are ripped, and he's got the jacket that makes him look a little formal, but he's got the tennis shoes that make him look informal. So kind of combination of both. He's kind of trying to look like a pastor, but also look hip and young and cool and relevant. And the guy on the right, he is young anyway, but the idea is you wear a shirt that's short sleeve shirt untucked, and you have to have ripped jeans. That's apparently the thing now, ripped jeans. When I was a kid, and some of you old people know what I'm talking about. When I was a kid, when you had ripped jeans, you were embarrassed because that meant you were poor. Yeah. All the poor, right? We had patches. My mom sewed those. Remember the 60s where they had all those hippie patches and the love patches or whatever? She would sew those onto my jeans. Anyway, I didn't know I was a hippie at the time until I looked in and saw all these hippie patches, these peace signs. I'm like, what? She just grabbed whatever was in the store. But anyway, in my day, it was ripped jeans meant you were poor and you're ashamed of them, right? Nowadays, you're ashamed if you don't have rips in your jeans, and they cost twice as much as anybody else's. To us old people, we can't imagine that. But the idea behind the pastors to look young, hip, and cool. Why? So when unbelievers come into church, that they will see and be able to identify easily with him, right? If young, hip people came into our church today, you think they could just look at Brother Chad and identify with him? No, he's dressed up in a suit and tie and matching and all that stuff. No. You have to be able to be identifiable to young people, and so that includes your look, right? I'm not trying to make fun of how they look. How they look is how they look. What I'm trying to say is, if we've done things one way for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, all of a sudden changing it in the last 50 years, we should stop and think about it, right? We should stop. And now in the Old Testament, the priests wore robes. The Old Testament Levites, they wore robes, and when they did things in the temple, they wore robes. The idea behind it is that they didn't look casual like their everyday clothes, but they looked set apart for something that was sacred, right? Now, mainline Protestant denominations took their cue from the Old Testament because if you remember back when there were Methodists who still believed the gospel, or there were Congregationalists who believed the gospel, or there were Presbyterians who believed the gospel. In the early days, a lot of them would wear what the Catholics, what looked like a little bit of Catholicism, kind of a dress kind of a thing, I guess, right, with the high collars and stuff. Like even the people that were like, we think the Catholic Church is the Antichrist, even those people, they took their cues from the Old Testament. They would wear something that was kind of like that, like a robe, I guess you might say. That went by the wayside in favor of suits by Spurgeon's day, I guess. By Spurgeon's time, maybe even a little bit before Spurgeon's time, the idea was three-piece suit, right? But that's how it started. It switched from robes to suits and ties. But the idea is the same whether it's a robe or suit and tie. The idea behind the principle is the same, to look formal. The pastor, the preacher is to look formal because he's set apart. He doesn't look like you and he doesn't look like me, right? And some of you may say, well, I'm glad Brother Chad doesn't look like me, or I don't. No, I'm not, just joking about that. But anyway, that didn't go over well, did it? All right, anyway. But the idea is the same whether you're a pastor, but I'm talking about pastors. The idea is kind of the same that I've always felt, and this is just me, you don't have to believe this. I've always felt that I've been taught and kind of agreed with and thought it was kind of adopted that If you're a Christian, we're not talking about unbelievers, folks. An unbeliever can come in wearing anything they want. We don't care as long as it's not graphic and they're not like showing body parts or whatever. Unbelievers can come wearing anything they want. We're not going to care. We want them to come in and hear the gospel. As long as it's not something that's inappropriate, they can come on in, and we're not going to look at them and see how they're dressed, whether they have ripped jeans. We don't care, right? We want them to get saved, right? But if you're a Christian today, I've always been taught, and I believe that the idea is, look, it's not necessarily what you wear, whether it's a three-piece suit or whatever, but you wear the best that you have. I've always heard that. In that way, as a Christian, you would honor God by wearing your best and showing that you have your Sunday. Remember they used to call it Sunday clothes? You had your Sunday clothes, right? And you had your Sunday clothes, and you didn't wear those on any other because they were special clothes set aside for a special day, set aside for a special place where you went, and that's the church. Now, if you're an unbeliever, I don't expect you to wear your best. I don't even think you think it was important. It's not, and we don't care about that either if you're an unbeliever. But if you're a Christian, you want to honor God, and I've always been taught that you honor God by wearing your best. If your best is this and no suit or tie or whatever, then that's fine. You wear your best. I remember when I was going to school in Arkansas when I was a little kid, they did not wear... My mom was on her own. I'm not going to say we were poor. We were poor, right? I'm not going to say we were dirt poor like some. But anyway, the school I went to in Arkansas, you did not have to wear shoes. There was no shoe requirement, right? And I found out later that part of the reason why there's no shoe requirement is we had a number of kids that were too poor to afford school. This is rural Arkansas, right? And so we had enough money that I had shoes. But I wouldn't wear shoes because what boy wants to go to school with shoes when he could go to school barefoot? So I always went to school barefoot, right? Even though we weren't that poor, I did have shoes. But I remember the first day I was in Memphis, Tennessee. We moved our first day of school, and we're walking out the door, and my mom looks at me and she's like, "Where's your shoes?" I'm like, I'm not wearing any shoes, right? She said, "This ain't Arkansas. What are you talking about?" I'm like, "Oh, it'll be just the same. Don't worry about it." And she let me go to school without shoes. And of course, they called the principal within an hour, and the kids laughed at me. And I got I got sent to the principal's office. The principal told me, "Son, here we wear shoes." So I found out anyway. The idea is that you wear the best you have, right? That's what I've always taught. Now, because of the seeker-sensitive movement, and because of the idea behind church, not now as spiritual growth of Christians, the idea is to attract as many numbers as possible to attract unbelievers to church. The pastor needs to dress casual so those unbelievers that come in can feel set at ease. He's more like them. He looks like them. He even acts and talks like them and says cool phrases and stuff like 6'7" or whatever. I don't know, whatever, right? Because of the seeker-sensitive movement to attract unbelievers, now the pastor has to dress casual. And casual, today's pastor means he wears his best pair of ripped jeans that he has. His best pair, right? Whatever. But what's the message being sent to unbelievers? Is it come on in and feel comfortable here? Is that the message that's sent to unbelievers? But what message are we trying to send, or what message should we be trying to send? I've got a quote by Todd Friel. I don't know how to say his last name. He has a pretty popular internet radio stuff. He says, is it possible some of these simple things like a dress and attire have actually said something and affected the church? What do visitors think when they see what we wear in church? What does the visitors say? Does our dress say that we're doing something special here, that we're worshiping a lofty God, or does our dress say that we're just worshiping a casual God, and this isn't all that important because it looks like they just rolled out of bed? You can agree with him or not. I think it was a good quote. I like it. And I'm just going to say I agree with it. So the pastor, not only the pastor, the way he dresses, but also the second thing under pastor, pastoral authority, right? I think we can go to extremes. You can hold to the pastor as a rock star, which many Pentecostal churches do and charismatic churches do. And then when their rock star gets accused of child molestation, all of a sudden, which a bunch of them have been accused of different things anyway. I won't go into that, but I've kept up with it all, and I know you've kept up with it all too, sister. But anyway, we don't want the pastor to be a rock star. He's not a rock star. On the other hand, you don't want to be so casual with the pastor that you just treat him like he's just like anybody else, especially in church, right? I remember when I was a kid, and if you ever had this done, I'm not speaking ill of you. Please believe me. It's all I could think of when I was doing this lesson. When I was a kid, y'all remember when it was pretty popular in the 80s, especially, where if you were a kid and you were brought up in independent fundamental Baptist churches, you would have your favorite preacher sign your Bible, and you'd have different preachers sign your... Again, I'm not speaking ill of that. I'm just saying we don't need to promote a thing that... In some kids, I'm sure that was innocent. I'm sure I had Tom Landry, Dallas Cowboy coach. Tom Landry signed my Bible once. How about that? Y'all think y'all got somebody? I had Tom Landry. All right, but anyway, most of y'all don't know who he was. But anyway, I remember that where the preacher was kind of like a rock star. And I remember some of my younger friends, they were called to preach, and it was later found out that they were just influenced by the rock star thing. Who doesn't want to be that, right? But look, don't be extreme on one side and treat the pastor like a rock star. Don't be extreme on the other side and treat the pastor like he's just anybody. Like there's no difference between him and anybody else. I remember standing up doing Sunday school. I got to hurry. One Sunday, we had just got a new pastor. I'll not say his name because everybody knows him. A lot of people know him here. But he just came, and he's our new pastor. And the old pastor left. And one of the reasons why the old pastor, the problem we had is he and the people, it was a small church, they got too close. The people that owned the church hired him, and he worked for them, and they played dominoes all the time, and there's nothing wrong with that, but I think there's something to be said that familiarity breeds contempt. And by the 10th or 12th, 15th year, it had done that. And so I, in my infinite wisdom at Sunday school, stood up, and the new pastor was sitting there over there, and I said, look, guys, we have a new pastor, we want to do things right. I said, I think familiarity breeds contempt, and we have to treat the pastor like I'm just saying right, like I've been saying right now. On the one hand, not like a rock star. On the other hand, not so familiar where he's backslapping. He's our best bud, and we have him over all the time, and we play dominoes and stuff. I said we need to find a happy medium between the two, because familiarity breeds contempt. And the guy our new pastor said out loud, not being mean or nothing, just said out loud, it doesn't have to. And I thought to myself, well, that's true. It doesn't have to, but I've been here. It has. And it happened to that guy. And he left after about a year and a half. So he went to work for the family that wanted always to have the pastor in their house, right? So he went to work for them, played games with them and all, and it happened the same way. But anyway, we have to treat our pastors with respect. Modern day pastors are cool, and they're hip, and they're just like everybody else, right? When someone has a title like pastor, it creates an atmosphere of respect and authority. That's been lost with the new type of pastor in the worship churches. The respect and authority has been lost, right? And I think it's something that we need to have, right? When the pastor dresses casually and he talks casually and we talk to them casually, we address them casually, that respect can be broken down. What about the third thing, preaching? What's modern day preaching like? Expository preaching is not really done anymore in modern churches. Expository means you just take a passage, you take a book of the Bible, you're going verse by verse through the book. You take John chapter 3, you're going verse by verse through the chapter. Or you take a passage in John 3, you're going verse by verse through that 12 or 15. And it could take you a week, could take you 2 weeks, whatever. You're just going, what does the Bible say? God gave us his word. Let's go through it. Now, modern day preaching is not that anymore. It's more like a feel-good talk where I've got a couple points. I may get a couple verses that kind of go along with my points or whatever, but I want you to feel good about what I'm saying. I want you to be the best that you can be. So there's not going to be anything said about hell. There's not going to be anything said about sin. Not going to be anything said about the need for repentance. Nothing like that, right? Expository preaching went out of favor. So now most Sunday mornings, it's like I said before, it's like a TED Talk. Why? Why did we change? Visitors don't want to come in and hear that you're doing a series on Genesis, and now you're on Genesis chapter 4. That's boring. They want to come in and see you preach a sermon about how I can live my best life now. Or they want to come in and hear you preach, if they're like religious and they're still lost, they want to come in and hear about the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse or something like that. They don't want to see, I'm going through the book of Genesis. How boring is that? Anyway, so that went out the window. So now it's like a TED Talk. Because otherwise it's too boring. Let me read you a quote by Matthew Everhart. Said this: the implication that the scriptures are in any way boring is deeply problematic. Yes, there are certainly boring preachers, And there's certainly bored listeners, but there's not a single boring text in the entire 66 books of the Bible, unquote. So now the service starts with a 30-minute or more music concert, low lighting and all the emphasis on the stage and all that sort of stuff and the screen and all that. And then the pastor gets up and gives a talk. It's not really a sermon. That would turn people off, we call it. So we call it a talk. It's got to be filled with some comedy, got to be filled with humor, and got to be relatable to the people. Modern day problems like the cable guy came and I couldn't get my Starlink fixed and blah, 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 whatever. You got to be relatable to the people, that kind of a thing, right? Maybe even sometimes sadness, tell a sad story, maybe even get tears going a little bit. But it's got to be relatable from a guy that looks hip and cool and relatable, right? The message has to go with the look. It has to, right? You can't have those two different things. So instead of preaching from a biblical text, it'll be more in form of a self-help talk where you can walk away feeling good about yourself. No mention of sin, no mention of hell, no mention of repentance, no mention of the need to be born again. Maybe there'll be some mention about you need to be improved in certain areas of your life, and I'll tell you how. I had a Baptist preacher do that when I was visiting a church nearby. Brother Chris, why don't you go to church where you live? It's an hour away. Yeah, well, I tried that 20 years ago, and this one guy, one Baptist church I visited one Sunday night, he gave a thing about how to not lose your temper, right? Not biblically based, didn't turn to any biblical texts, just wanted to give us, I'm like, I could have got that from Dr. Phil and probably would have had a better job done about it. I don't go to church to hear about Dr. Phil stuff, but that's what you'll get today. Let's go to the second part. Worship space has also changed. Another element that's different in most modern churches is worship, the physical space, the physical auditorium, right? Some examples are spacing and layout. The centrality of the musicians are front and center. How many people would be in a praise band if you told them you're going to be in the back and everybody's going to be faced forward, no one's going to see you? Yeah. No one would join the praise band. No one's going to see them, right? So they're central. The preacher no longer sits in a chair at the front. Is that a small thing? Probably so. But what does it say? It says that the preacher, the person giving us our content that day, that he is elevated, not that we see him as a rock star. I just went over that. We don't go to extremes. But the preacher, the man that's going to deliver the message, is a little bit elevated, and there's not a problem with that, right? Modern day worship, the preacher's going to sit on the front row. And if he wants to, I don't care. That's fine, if that's your choice. But they've taken the seats off the stage, right, in modern worship. They don't have what we have here. This is old school, what we have here. This is old school, right? The choir spaces are gone. There's no more choir space in modern churches. Because you don't need a choir when you have a praise band, right? Choir is old school anyway. Who wants to listen to a bunch of people, especially if they're in robes, a bunch of people just like sing and just listen to them? That's really weird. And no instruments behind them? No amplification? Oh, that's kind of strange. So they did away with the choir loft because you need a couple things. Number one, you need more room for the praise band. Number two, you can't have a choir loft because you need this whole front side of the auditorium to just be one big screen. One huge screen. You don't believe it? Go online. One huge screen. Now, what we have on our two screens, I've seen churches half of our size. You think our church is small? I've seen churches half of our size have bigger screens than that, and their little bitty 15 people go to that church. So you can't have a choir loft. So choir lofts are gone. They're gone the way. Choir spaces are gone, replaced by the praise band. Technological screens are up front. And like I say, you look at some modern churches, the screens make up the entire backdrop of the whole stage. Am I right, Brother Keith? Yeah, he gave a thumbs up, so that means I'm right. Furniture. Pews are out, chairs are in. You won't find pews in modern churches. That doesn't mean if you have chairs that you're a modern church and that you praise and worship. I didn't say that. Pulpits are mostly gone. By the way, if you have a pulpit, it won't stay up here. Like we have one, you'd like to try to move this. It's heavy. Y'all ever tried to move this? It's heavy. It's a heavy pulpit. But they don't have that anymore. Why? Because your pulpit can't stay up there. Right? At the most, they'll have a plastic lightweight pulpit that they'll put up when the preacher starts preaching, and then after he's preaching, they'll take it away. But nothing permanent. Especially not something big like that. That's not no. Now, the Bible isn't like strong about pulpits. There is that one mention in Nehemiah in Ezra's day where they had a revival, and Ezra said stood upon a pulpit made of wood to read God's word. But the idea behind the pulpit, it lends more of a seriousness to what's happening. It's more of a scholarly, serious thing to what's happening. It also blocks the preacher. If you see, you ever seen Spurgeon's pulpit? You see some of the old pulpits, they're huge. This one's like not even half the size of some of the old ones. Now, why was that? The preacher hides behind the pulpit because the preacher's not a rock star. If the preacher's a rock star, you don't want to see rock stars have to hide behind pulpits. If you're a rock star, you need to be out there in front walking around and have the spotlight on you while you're giving your TED Talk sermon, right? Your TED Talk, not a sermon. Sorry about that. But this projects authority as someone who's giving God's word. It blocks the preacher. It makes the preacher small. But in today's worship, it wants you to see the pastor in full view and concentrate on the pastor and how good his ripped jeans look and all that sort of stuff. The bigger, in my opinion, the bigger the pulpit, the better. But in today's society, in today's worship services, the smaller the pulpit and the lighter it is so we can take it on and off the stage. So the pulpit stays on the stage for like 10 or 15 minutes in the morning, 10 or 15 minutes in the evening. I don't know if they do anything in the weekdays or whatever, but that's it. Not a permanent pulpit like we have. That's no bueno, according to the new stuff. And talking about the preaching is not... The preaching of the Word of God is not just another lecture. I listen to lectures all the time about the Bible and lectures about biblical stuff and theology, but preaching is not supposed to be that, and it isn't that. Preaching is much, much different, right? It's not just preaching is not like Sunday school and shouldn't be. It's not just another lecture. It's not something you can get anywhere. Preaching is a solemn event. It's a proclamation of God's word. That's why some preachers, and I don't care if you do it or don't do it, some preachers will have you stand through the reading of the word or whatever. I have no problem with that. I did see lately one preacher, I'm not going to say his name, old school preacher who's no longer with us, but I don't think he demanded this. I don't know. But the whole audience, when he walked to the pulpit, the whole audience stood up in honor of the preacher. Again, you can say for yourself whether that's good or not good, whether that's treating the preacher like a rock star or not. I'm not going to argue about that. It's nothing to get an argument with. But anyway, preaching is something different, right? And we need to treat it as such. It's not just another TED Talk. I'm worried that some of y'all don't know what I mean when I say TED Talks. Does some of you older people know what a TED Talk is? Okay, good. I'm sorry. I don't mean to assume. My fault. Third thing, the lighting at the very bottom. During the music, the lighting is always low. Why? Well, many reasons. One reason I think is to imitate a rock concert. Because when you go to a concert, the lighting is low and all the lighting is on the stage. Why? Because the show is on the stage. That's where the show is, right? So when the praise band is on, the lighting is low. Why? Well, you don't need a lot of lights to be able to read a hymn book because you don't have hymn books, right? You just have the words up on the screen. And you don't have hymn books around at all anymore. So the lighting is low. So it's more like a rock concert. People that come into our worship service that are unbelievers, they'll feel more comfortable being here because it's like what they're used to, like a concert, right? And so that's a good thing. You don't need the lights, and all the focus is concentrated on the stage and all the heavy lighting on the stage. And these lights, it's kind of like these would be turned out, right? Or if we had a dimmer switch, way low. So that's almost dark in here, right? So the lighting is like a concert Now, it's mainly on the band. Now, that continues when the pastor gets up. When the pastor gets up, even sometime the pastor will even have spotlights on him, right? But the same thing's true. The lighting is low. Some churches get in arguments. Should the lighting be low or not so low? I want to take notes. Well, I do it on my iPad, so I don't need lighting or whatever. So, but for the most part, the new modern worship style churches, the lighting will be low in the congregation, right? I've got another, and the spotlight's on the praise band, and when the praise band sits down, the spotlight's on the pastor. I got another quote by Todd Friel, who did a whole series on this. He said, "Should we spotlight the pastor? What does that say?" It says he's the star. Who should be the star of a sermon in a church service? Last time I checked, Jesus. What about setting the mood? What does that say when we set the mood for the church? It says that our religion is somewhat mystical, that there's a way to feel about God. Furthermore, if during worship the spotlight is on the worship team, the spotlight is on the worship team. Furthermore, if I'm worshiping in the dark, I'm not worshiping as a congregation, I'm worshiping as myself. Worship when we come together should be congregational. We worship together. That's why we come together. Can you worship God on your own? Yes. But we come together for congregational, as a congregation, worship. For corporate, if you want, a corporation, corporate worship. That's why we come together, right? So he makes an argument for why you shouldn't turn the lights down, right? So there are a lot of other examples. Some of these I don't go into. So let's just go to the conclusion because how much time do I have, brother? 7 minutes, we'll be done. All right, here we go. So conclusion at the bottom. So one thing I just want to point out that I think is part of this, maybe some people don't realize this, don't you think it's a little bit arrogant to assume that the Christians who came before us that did something a certain way for thousands of years, just to assume that those people were just too ignorant and we know the better way to worship God when we come together, you know? I've said it a million times, I'll say it again. Just because something's been done for hundreds of years doesn't make it right. OTOH, on the other hand, if a church has done something as a body of believers, or if you want to narrow it down, Protestant churches, if you want to narrow it down, Baptist churches, whatever, if churches have done a certain thing in the way they worship for hundreds or even thousands of years, maybe before you just ditch that and think, oh, we know better because we're the young generation, maybe we should stop and look at some of the reasons behind why churches do or have done what they did. Why do we have a pulpit that can't be removed, right? Why do we have a choir? Just little stuff. I know this is little stuff, guys, and none of this is going to make a big difference as far as I'm concerned. But before we make wholesale changes, maybe we should stop and say, hey, maybe there's a reason why we've always done it a certain way, right? Maybe something as inconsequential as should we have a pulpit or not. If I came to this church and we decided not to have a pulpit, I wouldn't cause that to make me get in a tizzy and leave the church. But there are things that we've had for thousands of years that we should think about before we just jettison them and throw them overboard, right? We can't think that those that came before us are just a bunch of ignorant morons. Because I would wager that the Christians that came before us were more informed and biblically sound than the Christians today. That's just me talking. You don't have to agree with that. I would repeat that to anybody that asked me. Let's go to the very bottom. Conclusion. Number one thing. So what will happen to the church if it continues on the decline of Pentecostalization in its worship service and secularization of its worship service? Number two things it'll cause. Number one, it'll cause the continued decline of the church. Many denominations that used to preach the gospel and stand for the word no longer do. I'm talking about the Episcopals. I'm talking about the Lutherans. I'm talking about the Methodists. By the way, not all the Methodists. Some of them split off, the more conservative. I'm talking about some of the Baptists, and the Southern Baptists are headed that way, but the other Baptists have already gone that way, not the Independents, right? All these people that used to stand for something, now what? I've already said it a few minutes ago. Now what are all these churches doing? The Episcopals, the Lutherans, some of the Presbyterians, some of the Baptists, what are they all doing? They're all going down the same roads. They used to preach the gospel and stand for the word. They no longer do. They affirm abortion. They affirm sodomite marriage. They affirm women to the ministry. They affirm sodomites to the ministry. They ordain women pastors. They ordain LGBTQ people as well. That's the road that those churches have gone down. And that's when I say this modern way of worship, I think it'll just accelerate the decline of the church. I don't see how you can be a Southern Baptist church with praise and worship music, praise and worship Pentecostal ideology and theology, and stay the same way that you are. I don't see that happening. I see that 26% of the Southern Baptists said we want women to be affirmed as being pastors. I see that percentage only going up the more churches embrace the praise and worship, market-driven philosophy that church is only so that we can bring in big numbers of unbelievers. That's the only reason why we have church. I even heard one guy stand up and say this. I'll repeat it. Are you ready? Because he stood up. You can see it on the internet. He stood up in his church service. He said, guys, if you're a Christian, this church is not for you. Now, I know he thought he was being spiritual. He thought, well, the church is not for Christians. The church is for the lost and the hurting and the unbelieving and those who need God and all that. Yeah, the church is for all those people, right? But to stand up and say, if you're a Christian, this church is not for you. I'm here for the sick, the lowly, the people that need something in their life, the people that blah, 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 right. I'm just saying. Second thing, I got to finish up. I heard the bell. The second thing that's going to happen as we continue on this road of Pentecostalization and secularization of modern worship, it'll make the church more like the world. It already has made the church more like the world, right? You say it doesn't matter what the pastor wears. Okay, if you want to get technical, no. He can preach the same message in blue jeans and a shirt than he can in his suit. Okay, if you want to get technical, yes, you're right. But is there a reason why in the Old Testament and in the hundreds and thousands of years we've been doing church that the pastor's always dressed differently than the congregation? Or at least dressed in the best that he had, which in a lot of Southern Baptist churches was better than the congregation could dress, right? So there has to be a reason for that, right? Can he deliver the same message in blue jeans? Yes, he can. Should he? No, I don't think so. Right? The church is going to become more like the world. It already has become like the world because we're trying to get numbers in. We think the church is primarily for the world, so we're going to make the church more comfortable to worldly people so that they will come in, right? Churches like that have grown. You cannot deny that. They've increased attendance. They have grown, right? But let me tell you this, and you'll hear this and you'll see this and you've heard this before. The time of the greatest growth of the church down through history has been the times when the church has been persecuted the most. At the times when the church has been persecuted the most, the church has grown in spirituality, maybe not numbers, but later on that usually leads to a growth in numbers also. But in spirituality and strength, like when the Christians were getting torn to the lions in the Roman arena, all those people that were influenced, that were watching Christians sitting down and praying and getting torn by the lions, right? Persecution has been the greatest time of advancement of the church in human history. When the culture adopts to the church or the church adopts to the culture and everything's hunky-dory, the church usually doesn't see much growth during those time periods. Usually sees stagnation of growth and spiritual growth of its people. So not when the church acts like the world, the church doesn't grow. So if your idea is church growth, that's fine. You're doing the opposite of what history has shown us you should be doing, right? I've got to finish it off because I heard the bad bell. Finish it off by this Todd Friel quote. He said, "The flashing lights, the fog machines, the high energy worship that defined youth ministries in the 80s and 90s are now the blueprint for the entire congregations. The youth pastor used to do all these flashy things. Now the youth pastor is old enough and he's your preacher, so he's still doing all those flashy things. While these tactics draw crowds in, they risk creating a church experience that feels more like a concert than a sacred space for encountering God. The main thing about worship you need to understand is that it's theocentric. God is centered. Worship is our reasonable and normal response to a glimpse of the glory of the infinite being who is God. Emotion is not worship. It's involved, but it's not worship. You can work emotion up. People do it all the times. If you want to see an excited group, go to a playoff game down in Cowboy Stadium. This guy lives in Dallas. You can work up emotion, but worship is only going to be as genuinely high as your knowledge of God is deep. That's what worship is supposed to be, that we have a glimpse of God. We see him in his word. Not a visible glimpse, but we see God through the preaching and teaching of his word. Let's stand and be dismissed. I appreciate y'all's time and attention. Appreciate y'all letting me finish this. I went a little bit over. I thought I'd be done by May, and I wasn't, but anyway, I got close anyway. So anyway, just again, nothing to want to make anybody mad or make anybody upset or whatever. Just some things that I'm worried about. I'm worried about modern evangelical Pentecostal type worship and the modern pragmatic movement that's infected so many of our churches today. And it's going to affect the Southern Baptists first. And then unfortunately, I think independent Baptists won't be far behind because we're like anybody else. We stay 2 steps behind the world. Or we stay 3 or 4 steps behind the world, but we still stay behind the world, unfortunately. Let's not ditch everything. Let's think about why things are done in a certain way, and let's think through whether that is a good reason or not a good reason, whether it's important or not important or any of those things. That's really all I'm trying to say here. Anyway, Brother Elsie, would you dismiss us in prayer?